Hmm.
And good evening, web accessibility enablers. This is Dennis Deacon, the organizer of the Chicago Digital Accessibility and Inclusive Design Meetup. And good evening, web accessibility. Oh, that's great. This is Dennis Deacon, oh. Organizer of the
Apparently, there's a delay.
No. Inclusive Design Meetup. Okay, so I know what that was. In a different browser, I had the YouTube feed on. So that shows you there's about a 20-second delay. So, okay, good. So if there's any cussing, we'll make sure we get it, we'll cut it off at the pass within 20 seconds. So in any case.
YouTube, who cares?
Yes. So first off, thank you for attending, everyone who is attending. This is our first Google Hangout. This is our first in-person event. And, you know, this is something that we're going to consider doing not solely for future events, but to add to future events, especially during the winter. I know when we started earlier this year, we found it very difficult to have people attend meetups when it was, 20 below zero and snowing and such. I'm not sure that's going to be a problem this winter, but I do know that I'd like to extend our reach also to those who cannot attend in person. So I would look to have these Google Hangouts live streaming of our events, of more events as we move forward. Experts that we have on the in the Hangout. Myself, I don't consider myself an expert, but I will try to answer any questions. We also have Elizabeth Carpenter. Say hello, Elizabeth.
Hello.
And why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself?
Okay, well, I currently am working as a UX researcher at Humana. I've been doing accessibility since about 2000, 2001. Kind of got thrown into it. Didn't know a lot about it when I started, but had to learn really, really quick. So my training is in user experience. So I'm not a developer, although I'd like to play one on TV. So mainly what I really know is user experience. So how does a user perceive any particular piece of technology? And that includes a user that perhaps cannot hear what's going on or see the screen or use a fancy mouse or something like that. So
great.
Oh, and Dennis and I used to work together at United.
Yes, I worked with Elizabeth at United Airlines for about a year and a half.
Yeah, probably about that.
Yeah, and it was sort of backtracking how I fell into accessibility. The Department of Transportation came out with a mandate that all the airlines must have accessible websites in two phases, two stages. And we had a coworker who sort of spearheaded the effort. He left the company. And then Elizabeth I viewed as the lead. I was sort of grabbing onto the coattails of both the previous individual as well as now Elizabeth. Elizabeth eventually left the company, and I've been working with others within United to make their website more accessible. So accessibility has been a lot of fun. Very frustrating and challenging, but overall it's been a pleasure. I would say that one of the things that got my biggest pleasure is watching actual users, disabled users, using the website and with various disabilities, watching them succeed, watching them struggle, and learning from that. So That's just a huge geek moment for me. And I noticed our other expert has come online. Andrew, are you there?
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Awesome.
So, Andrew, why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself?
Sure. So my name is Andrew Larkin. I'm a developer, web developer, software engineer. Um, Throughout my career, I've actually worked in accessibility in varying capacities. First as a developer, and then also kind of taking responsibility for Comcast's technical accessibility initiatives, working for their VP of accessibility. So as of right now, I'm working as a software engineer for a company called GoGo here in Chicago. And a lot of what I do is actually not only looking at accessibility for how we're actually producing end products, but also thinking about how people who are creating technology are also actually being able to access technology.
Fantastic. I tell you what, Andrew, while I'm assisting one of our members who's trying to get online here, why don't you give a little background about what you did back in Philly?
Sure. So, yeah, so as I mentioned, I actually used to, when I lived in Philadelphia before I moved out to Chicago, I worked for Comcast. And as you know, Comcast is responsible for quite a lot, but in particular, I was focusing on creating accessible technology for the X1 platform. So that's, for those of you that don't know, that's Comcast's sort of next generation entertainment platform, entertainment operating system, as it's called. And the feature that I was primarily focusing on was a product called Voice Guidance. Voice Guidance was a talking television interface that was designed to help our customers who were blind or have low vision experience the full range of content on the X1 platform. So, you know, it wasn't just creating a screen reading experience, it was more of creating an audio experience that actually stood on its own. And it was important that we did this because we realized very quickly that a lot of the design choices that we had that worked visually didn't necessarily work when it came to an audio experience. So there was an extensive amount of work in trying to actually kind of think about what that audio would be like and create something that, you know, kind of approaching it from the idea that this is an experience that we would want anyone to feel comfortable using. We didn't want it to feel like something was tacked on. We wanted it to actually feel like a rich, independent experience. And it's launched, it's live, it's actually part of the X1 platform. For those of you that have Comcast, who have X1, you can actually access it now through the menu. Just press A twice and you can actually get to it. It'll pop up a little mobile. Yeah, it was an exciting project. It was fun to work on. Certainly some interesting technical challenges, to say the least. But yeah, that was primarily my focus during my tenure at Comcast.
Okay, sounds great. And one thing I'll say, you know, when I decided to start this meetup almost exactly a year ago, I asked Elizabeth up front. I said, "Hey, would you like to be part of this?" And she definitely said yes. And I wanted her to be part of this due to her experience in accessibility. And then Andrew, in one of our many early events at a bar, so they were mainly social networking events, Andrew showed a plethora of enthusiasm. That's the way I'm going to describe it, and I'm going to stick to it. About the topic and about the meetup, so I definitely wanted to have him on board. So the three of us are plodding along. We have, I know right now it sounds like end of January, we have a very, very exciting event. I'm not going to spill the beans. I will just say that a site that recently redesigned and was made more accessible, we're going to have them present. Right now it sounds like potentially around January 28th. hang on, stay tuned for announcements once we solidify that as far as the date, time, and location. So with that said, I'd like to start taking some of the questions that are coming in, and I am so happy to say that some questions are actually coming in. We got a question from Stephanie from the Meetup site. She asked, what are your thoughts on the future of live streaming video, Periscope, Meerkat, Blab, FB Live, etc., and accessibility for the hearing impaired and deaf audiences? Excellent question. So first off, just a little insight and story about how this particular event came to being. Myself and Andrew, we met to talk about something else, actually, and this idea became a reality. And one of the things that excited me about Google Hangouts was the fact that there was a plugin that did captioning, or so I thought. I'm a very strong proponent for captioning videos, so I was definitely going to want this, and I thought, how great to have live captions for Google Hangout. So after we decided to do this, I started digging further into what this plugin would do. And I quickly realized that it did not do what I thought it did. What it did allow is CART individuals, people who do captioning through a shorthand method, it would allow them to add captions, live captions, to these live events. So we don't have any people skilled with CART right now, so obviously we don't have live captioning. Ideally, that's the way we would want to go. It's, for lack of a better way to describe it, it's cost prohibitive right now for our meetup. But I would definitely say that it's important to provide the same content to anyone who wants to attend, no matter what their ability is. So I know that as technology gets better, I mean, you know, YouTube has a method of doing auto captioning, and I will say that we at United Airlines found out recently how bad auto captioning is and how embarrassing it can be. So yeah, so we told them don't do that. So obviously, as time marches forward, things get better. I do think that everything's going to end up having to be accessible. The question is timing. When? Is it going to be 6 months from now? Is it going to be 6 years? You know, who knows? I do know that there are a bazillion people working on these type of solutions and problems to come up with solutions. So that's a very good question. I'll tell you, as soon as we learn of a solution, we'll definitely try to get it, not only use it, but try to get a case study out there so this way we can present it. So thank you very much for that question. Greatly appreciate it. Let's see here. What else do we have as far as questions coming in? Let me check the hashtag here. If I can type. Okay. Okay, so Bob Wilson seems like he was testing the hashtag, and yes, it does work. So we did get that. Thank you very much, Bob. Any questions from the Meetup site? Let's see here.
You know, while you're looking at that, you know, just to kind of take off of it.
Go ahead. And Andrew, it seems like you froze. Are you there? Elizabeth, are you still there?
Can you hear me? I am still here.
Okay, and you're still there. Looks like Andrew's still having technical difficulties. Well, I tell you, while we're waiting for Andrew to come back, oh, Andrew, are you there?
Yeah, I'm here.
Okay, fantastic. Go ahead.
Minor glitch. No, what I was going to say is, you know, one of the interesting things about live streaming, because, you know, you're absolutely right. You know that live captioning is kind of like the holy grail, right? And you know, the only company that's gotten remotely close to really doing anything that's cool, and I don't know if anyone remembers that a while back that there was a video series where they would actually do live caption theater, where they would actually write a script, record the video, run it through auto captioning, and then take the output and create a new script, and you just get progressively worse and worse with each iteration that they would do, and get more and more ridiculous. So the technology isn't itself, but I will say that the video streaming in general, you know, has been, you know, we shouldn't take it for granted. It has the prevalence of this technology is huge for people who who have hearing impairments. If for nothing else than the ability to actually communicate visually either through signing or what have you. So I mean, I don't want to you know, say that everything's doom and gloom, and that, you know, certainly audio captioning is definitely going to be that way of the future, and hopefully we can actually see that technology improve over time. But I don't want to actually I don't want to take away from the fact that, you know, where we are right now is actually vastly ahead of where we were even 10 years ago. So, you know, while we do have some ways to go, I'm highly optimistic about how we've been able to actually kind of utilize this technology. And it is a great example of a technology that's not only something that is working with people with disabilities, but I mean, its widespread adoption means that it's also going to be something that's going to continue to be supported.
Exactly. Exactly. Okay, we got a question from We Are Passengers on Twitter. They are asking, what are some resources for accessibility training? Boy, that's a loaded question because it depends on what you're referring to. I know for myself, immediately, something that's immediately at the top of my head is screen reader training. And it's funny, as I've been dealing with this for the past year, I am a huge proponent for web developers to having some modest skills using the screen reader, listening to their web pages, web apps, to ensure that not only is it coded properly, but what's being communicated to the user is makes sense. Okay. And it's funny because I literally did a search just last week on screen reader training, and unfortunately, the only thing I could find was in the UK. I do know that, and Andrew or Elizabeth, you can correct me, I'm not going to get this right, Slayton U or Accessibility U, it's an annual event down in
Access
Austin.
U, yeah.
Access U. They have a annual event, and it's more training focused rather than like a conference. And last year, it appears that they did have screen reader training. CSUN in 2016 is supposed to have a workshop dedicated to assistive technology. Now, when I read the description, it doesn't look as in-depth on screen readers as I would hope, or in-depth or hands-on, period. I do know that the workshops last year were very engaging, but I'm just wondering if it's more show and tell or if it's more hands-on learning how to use a screen reader and assistive technology. So, We Are Passengers. If you would, if you'd post back on Twitter, let us know what kind of training specifically that you were looking for, and we'd definitely be happy to help.
Yeah, and actually, just to kind of run with that a little bit, you know, it does depend on, you know, what kind of training you're looking for. But, you know, I can speak, you know, if you're looking for more of a technical perspective, you know, there is a surprisingly large amount of information that you can find online, and you know, there are certain online resources like webaim.org where you'll find a wealth of articles and blog posts that you can read, where people are talking about, you know, major issues that people are experiencing. Having said that, Some of the standard developer resources like Stack Overflow do have an active community of accessibility experts that are answering questions. So if you are looking to answer specific questions about working with assistive technology and in terms of creating technology for mobile or web applications, someplace like Stack Overflow or WebAIM are excellent resources, and I would highly recommend them.
And just to tack on to that, and you mentioned WebAIM. WebAIM's forum, they call it their community, but their forum I have found to be priceless. It's a little, I find it a little clunky. It sort of uses an old school method of posting. It's through email. But if you read the forums, it's rich with information. And leaders in the accessibility field are the ones who are monitoring and posting. So I do find that very valuable. Elizabeth, do you have any top of mind accessibility training resources that you can think of?
Well, can you still hear me?
We can.
Okay, good. Well, I actually learned all of these things just by brute force. As far as learning how to use a screen reader, the company I work for bought it, and I just used it all the time. It was always running on my computer, so I kind of got used to it. That was one of the ways that I learned things. At the time I was learning this, there wasn't a lot of resources out there. I will say that I have gone to the Access U. I think the name of the conference is called Knowbility.
Knowbility is a great organization.
Yeah, it's very good. It's small, and it is individual kind of little classes that you pick from. It's easy to kind of pick up things. If you miss it on one day, you can pick it up on another. But one option that people might want to look at, if there is an organization in your community that is helping people with disabilities to learn how to use a computer, things like that, I don't know that if you ask them, perhaps they'd let you take the course in how to use a screen reader. You would actually be sitting and learning how to use a screen reader at the same time that other people with disabilities are learning how to use it. So that might be kind of interesting. I know there's a place in my neighborhood that does that. So.
And actually, and that's an excellent point. And actually, something that I've been noodling behind the scenes. We did user testing with Second Sense here in Chicago, and I do know that they offer screen reader training to people with disabilities, whether it be vision or cognitive and such. And I have considered seeing if we could create an event for developers for screen readers. But even besides that, if you go to one of your local organizations that do help people with disabilities, specifically for assistive technology, you can ask if maybe it's free for people with disabilities. Maybe you're willing to pay. I don't, whatever the case may be. But I would definitely say it would be well worth that skill that you would obtain.
And also, you might be able to trade with them. If you're a developer, you're someone who is very computer literate, maybe you could trade attending a class with teaching a class or teaching about some aspect of technology. So that could be a possibility.
Exactly. One other thing that I have found, and it's sort of partial training and partial inspiration, has been by several of the people who, what I consider leaders, who have posted their presentations on YouTube. People come to mind: Leonie Watson, Carl Groves, Marcy Sutton. These people have posted recent presentations, so let's say over the past year or two, that I have found so unbelievably valuable. I know one that comes to mind. If you literally want to start at the beginning, Jared Smith from WebAIM, he did a sort of like beginning web accessibility 101 or something like that. If you do a Google YouTube search, you'll see Jared Smith. Watch that. I think that's about an hour-long video, but it is so. It has great foundational information.
Oh, and also lynda.com, which has all of the training courses and videos. She does have Derek Featherstone doing an accessibility training. Now, I think sometimes you can get that a month free, but if nothing else, it'll cost you $25 to watch that.
Exactly. I don't know for sure. I don't want to promise anything, but I think lynda.com, typically this time of the year, especially like for the new year, they do have that 1 month free incentive to try it out. I would definitely strongly suggest Derek Featherstone's videos. I do know that if you deal with PDFs, they have great videos on PDF accessibility. If you're into WordPress, can't think of Morton is his first name, I think. He has done a wonderful series of videos for WordPress accessibility. So accessibility's, it's building steam. I'm surprised where I see it being mentioned, and it's even in cases to where it's not accessibility focused. It's in just a general developer community. So.
Yeah, and actually, I think we've mentioned some great things. I do want to also point out that there are, in fact, a lot of zero-cost solutions out there. And running off of the kind of idea, sometimes the best way to get familiar with something is to dive into it. If you're running on a Mac OS operating system, you have a screen reader built in VoiceOver, and Apple has substantial documentation on how to access that and use it. There's also a plethora of other accessibility tools built into that operating system. If you're on a Windows platform, there are actually free solutions that you can download. Specifically with a screen reader, there's an application called NVDA, and you can actually find that at nvaccess.org. That's a free screen reader. It was developed by a group out of Australia, and it's phenomenal. It actually is extremely feature-rich and actually is considered by some to be superior to JAWS, which is the standard for a Windows platform. If you're on Linux, I'm not entirely sure. I know that there are some built-in solutions for Linux, but something tells me that's going to be fewer people on this call than the others. And then from in terms of mobile accessibility, both iOS and
Andrew, you did break up there. You're frozen.
Well, I think what Andrew was going to say is there's a built-in screen reader in Android, so there is a way to turn on a screen reader on the mobile device on an Android phone.
Yeah.
Or an Android device. I think he's back.
Can you hear me?
Yep.
Yes.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, the best way to kind of get started on some of this, I admit that fully understanding accessibility is challenging because I think a lot of the resources out there are still kind of geared towards corporate compliance, and so a lot of them have cost associated with them. And even though we've mentioned some great online assets, sometimes it's difficult to find that hands-on, one-on-one. But remember that the people that are using this technology, the people that are using assistive technology, they're no more experts than you are. As a matter of fact, it's important to remember that most people who are blind or have low vision, or most people who have a disability, color blindness, even what have you, they're not super tech savvy. So your experience using the screen reader built into your iPhone or Android phone, or using a screen reader on your Windows or Mac computer is remarkably similar to what your people that are accessing your technology are going to be experiencing, because their experience is probably going to be similar to yours. Some people are experts. It's the same with everybody. So don't shy away from testing your technology and just diving into using these things, because you'd be surprised. You are remarkably close to replicating the experience of many people that are going to be accessing this for the first time.
Exactly. And then to tack on to that, you know, I feel at times that I am probably the world's most frustrated accessibility person, although I know that's not the case. But you know, I was learning screen reader. I was learning NVDA because it's free. And then actually it stopped working on my work computer. And now that I have a Mac at home, I've been trying to use VoiceOver, and the two are very, very different. JAWS and NVDA are somewhat similar. VoiceOver is quite different. That frustration is, you know, it gets to be too much at times. However, what snaps me out of it is if you can imagine what it's like for the person who depends on this assistive technology to be able to, you know, just read a web page just to get information, basic information. Imagine a person, let's say on a mobile phone, who's trying to use Uber to get, you know, get home. Okay, if that app, or say if a website is difficult to use, if the screen reader is difficult to use, imagine that frustration. So whenever I get frustrated, I get reminded that, you know, I'm not the only one. Look at the person who depends on this, is not just trying to use it as a testing tool. So.
And I just want to add, you know, we've been talking about screen readers, but other things that you can do to kind of learn more about accessibility, kind of just in general. There's a lot of really good books about it too. Also, one of the things that you can do is put your mouse in the drawer, because anybody who cannot
unplug it first.
Screen, yeah, well, you can, whatever. Anybody who cannot see the screen is not going to be able to use a mouse either. And then there are people who cannot use a mouse for particular reasons. So what you might want to do is memorize every single keyboard shortcut that there is. Although a lot of people who are probably in this group are power users, so they might know all those keyboard shortcuts right off the bat. But try to spend a half a day using your computer without using your mouse, and see how far it gets you.
Yes, probably not far at all with many sites, if not most.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so let's check the interwebs, see what other questions we might have. One question actually I had, and actually it sort of complements the question we already received. You know, what kind of training do you foresee needing to become more comfortable with digital accessibility? So let's not talk about screen reader training, because we've already discussed that. What other types of training do you feel you need to be better at web accessibility? Elizabeth, Andrew, I'll let you guys respond to that.
Oh, go ahead, Elizabeth.
No, go ahead, Andrew. I'm actually looking up some books, so.
Yeah, I think you know, it's a great question, and you know, one of the things that I think is starting to kind of emerge, and I'm going to speak strictly from a developer's perspective on this one, for starters, is that people need examples. You know, what I've seen a lot of is people trying to solve accessibility solutions and demonstrate how to actually use that, how to use a framework to solve certain accessibility solutions. So, for example, if you're an Angular developer, there is NG ARIA, which you can use that will actually go through and add important accessibility attributes to your markup, and actually help to make your code more accessible by default. But the only problem with that is that it actually doesn't really give people an idea of what's actually happening. It's a little magic, and it ends up being kind of obfuscated, and people don't understand, if something doesn't work quite right, how they can go about fixing it. So I think one of the things that I think would be vitally important from a training perspective for developers is more examples online of how to actually go about doing these things. And I'm seeing more and more coming about, and some of the resources that we've mentioned actually do provide solutions for this. But I think in general, one of the things that we desperately need in this community is, kind of standards around what it means to be an accessibility professional. What are some of the things, sort of like a checklist? I'm not suggesting that we actually go into a certification program, although that is actually something that's an initiative that's trying to happen. But it's kind of nice sometimes to be able to kind of say, well, what are my chops? What am I trying? What are the things that I should be learning about? And what are some of the criteria for that? So, if you're a programmer, you can go and you can actually do cones online, these Ruby cones or something like that, where you actually have people that have created exercises that help introduce you to these core concepts. Those kinds of things would be huge for helping people to understand. Other than that, I think it's goes back to that old thing. It's doing. It's trial and error. It's getting out there and actually seeing if something sticks, and listening to feedback from your customers, and being aware of who your audience is, and paying attention to when somebody says, what, your thing's broken and it doesn't work for me, and that becomes another tool in your basket. The difference between accessibility and pretty much anything else is that accessibility is really kind of getting into this territory of saying, you're thinking about 7 some odd billion different ways that people use technology, and I think it's one of those things that it's you could start off saying, like, you could make the decision to say, I want to wait around for that certification course to make it become live, and then I'm going to get a certificate that says that I've been certified as an accessible professional, and that might actually help you a lot. But nothing is better than just actually doing it, because I guarantee you that whatever your experience is with the app that you're working on, the technology that you're working with, is going to be radically different from the next person's.
I would definitely agree.
Okay. All right. Well, I actually, when I was in graduate school at DePaul in the HCI program, they had an accessibility course, which I took, and then also in some of my other courses where I was, I had my choice of doing a particular project. I did accessibility projects. So I don't know. I mean, if there was a certification program, it would be fun to take, although, because I've been doing it and it's something that I can put on my resume, I feel like I don't necessarily need that. I think I'm with Andrew, and I would rather actually be working with the people who are using the assistive technologies. So.
Exactly. I agree with that. You got the standards, you got all the online resources. I mentioned the video as well. But one of the things I can say has been the richest training that I have encountered this year is to watch people try to use a website. Watch someone with lesser ability than, let's say, myself, and that could be anything. That doesn't necessarily have to be low or no vision. That can be someone with cognitive issues. Just a quick story. We performed some remote testing with a user. The person was a quadriplegic, and I'll be very honest, I would never have known that they were quadriplegic because the way that they were moving the mouse around, I would have just figured it was someone with complete abilities. However, the one thing they also had traumatic brain injury. And that actually caused some cognitive issues to come out that we had never considered. And this is dealing with color. So, let's say if you have a tabbed interface, and you typically have the active tab be one color and then the inactive tab be another color, and then let's say you have a bar underneath the tabs. The colors that were used here were not intuitive to him, and it's funny because as I looked at it, I had always been told what to click on, where to go, and such as we were working on accessibility issues with these given pages. But when I thought of it as just a user, I could definitely see his point. I could see where he might see things differently than maybe I might. So that, again, user testing, watching someone use it, an actual user, is always going to be the richest thing. I'm going to try something here. Okay, so Elizabeth, you shared 2 books, and I know I have a book. I'm going to see if I can do this. So this is going to be a Google Hangout first for Dennis. So hold on one second. Screen share. Okay, let's see here. I am going to try to share this. So let's see here. Okay, so one of the books that, and I'm going to assume and hope that you're all seeing a web browser screen of Amazon.com. One of the books that Elizabeth is sharing is a Web for Everyone, Designing Accessible User Experiences by Sarah Horton. Elizabeth, why don't you just say a little bit about this book? Wouldn't you say this is more for designers as well as UX professionals?
Yeah, this is definitely a design book because I come from a background of user experience and specifically user research. I found this book to be very interesting. Now, I did read it about 2 years ago, like when it first came out, or a year or so. But it does have some, it is kind of from a designer's point of view. And being a former user experience designer and now a user experience researcher, I think that accessibility, it needs to start at the design department. I think by the time it gets to developers, it's too late. Not because developers are not able, but at that point, too many decisions have been made for you are potentially handing over an incredibly difficult task to your developers, and I think we need to treat developers a little bit nicer. The other book that I recommended is more of it explains the web content accessibility guidelines. It is the best book that I have ever read that explains those guidelines, because if you go to the website, there's a lot of different things. There's a lot of hyperlinks in there. You read about something and it shows you criteria. This kind of combines it all into one place.
Now, I will say, Elizabeth, the link that you sent me was for the Spanish version.
Oh, but there is an English version.
There is an English version. I was going to say, because, learning not only WCAG, but learning it in a different language, that might make it at least a hurdle for myself.
Oh, yeah, sorry. I didn't realize I clicked on the Spanish version.
I would say internationalization of technology is just as much a part of accessibility as considering developing for screen readers. So.
Exactly. And now I have a book that is not directly an accessibility book, but for designers and for developers, the second edition of Adaptive Web Design, Crafting Rich Experiences with Progressive Enhancement by Aaron Gustafson. This is a killer book. Just take my word for it. Get the electronic version, get the paperback, whichever you like. But it really shows how you start off with the bare bones, the basics, and in almost all cases, it's the content, and then you mark it up, you style it, you make it interactive, you provide the communication with ARIA. It's progressive enhancement. But it will definitely change the way you code. It will change the way you design. And all of it supports accessibility. He mentions accessibility throughout the book, but again, the title is not directly related to accessibility, but it supports accessibility in every chapter.
Mm-hmm.
Andrew, did you have any?
Resources?
Resources or books or whichever the case.
I read, so there's one book that I really liked was Jonathan House's book, which I don't think is available.
Andrew. You broke up there. Are you still there?
My internet connection is kind of lousy. Yeah, so Jonathan House's book, I don't believe it's available in the United States quite yet, although he's been trying to get it distributed here. Was a very effective book, I think, in describing ways to actually get accessibility work prioritized, which I think is something that, it's one thing to talk about, what are the techniques, but it's another thing to get your company or organization to actually buy into making accessibility a priority. And I think that book is really effective at actually kind of giving some really good ideas about how to actually work within the constraints of a project to make accessibility something important.
Right. And actually, as you're mentioning that, I'm trying to locate it. But go ahead.
Yeah, you're going to be challenged. I don't think it's on the American Amazon. You might have to go to Amazon.uk to find it.
Yeah. Okay. Go ahead.
In terms of other accessibility resources, I've spent an inordinate amount of time just scouring the internet, for things that really. I actually admit it. I spent most of my time, picking through the WCAG 2.0 specifications and actually trying to make sense of that. So I got a lot of my information from there. There's also, and I also had the benefit of actually working with some of the people that actually wrote some of this stuff, but there's also AOL years back actually put out this really great resource for people that are thinking about web accessibility specifically, called the DHTML Style Guide.
Oh, yes.
And what that does to offer is it offers some really great descriptions of how things should work. So this was sort of an effort by a bunch of accessibility professionals that that's the book right there.
No.
Yeah, so there was a bunch of accessibility professionals that came together and talked about, well, what are some of the common interaction patterns that we see on the web, and how should these things work for people with disabilities, from a keyboard navigation standpoint, from a screen reader standpoint, so it gives some great information. It's very, very lightweight, it's not a very heavy read, but it does really give some great examples, and I think it's kind of a good starting point, especially as we're getting into the realm of being able to kind of think about building web components and starting to create some of these patterns for our own reuse.
Exactly. I want to switch topics because I want to stay mindful of time. It's 8:50. We got about 10 more minutes left, and we actually did receive another question from the Twitterdom here. So let me pull that up. The question is, and it's funny because I find this this question actually very interesting. How do you find and hire people for user testing for accessibility? One of the things in just a recent user testing event we had, we found that if you have 10 people with disabilities scheduled to attend user testing, the attendance for that will likely be less than 50%. Now, typically user testing, and I know Elizabeth can speak to this, user testing, the testers are paid. Whether it be, like for myself, I'll pay someone with a Starbucks card because I'm at Starbucks. So I know they like Starbucks. But user testers, they're typically paid very well, very nicely. But however, one of the problems is people with disabilities, even though they're the largest segment that are unemployed, out of work, they also have self-esteem issues. And so what happens is, while they may agree to do the testing, when it comes time for the testing, or when, if they have to travel somewhere, many times they'll talk themselves out of it because they may feel there's no hope. There's a hopelessness. It's like, what's the point? Which is very disconcerting. But with that said, how do you find and hire people with disabilities to do user testing? I'm going to let Elizabeth handle the bulk of this. I do know that, again, the local organizations, they do assist with locating people in your locale to perform user testing. Sometimes they even have the facilities to do user testing. I also know that, and Elizabeth, you may know the name, and it could be usertesting.com. It's an online remote testing service. They actually also provide people with disabilities for user testing. But Elizabeth, go. I don't want to steal your thunder. Go ahead and share what you know.
Okay. Well, first I would like to just clarify. When you talk about hiring people to do user testing, are you talking about hiring a researcher, or are you talking about finding people to actually perform the tests?
It looks, based on the question, it looks like the individuals to actually perform to do the testing, not to moderate the testing.
Okay. Because to find UX researchers are a little bit harder to find than UX designers, but that's okay for me. What we do as far as finding the people to do any kind of usability testing is we work with a recruiter. So there are recruiting agencies out there that have a database of people. So there may be a recruiting agency that could scan for people with, say, you want to get 2 people with a visual impairment, 2 people with a hearing impairment, 2 people with a mobility impairment. That's possible that a recruiter can do that because they do have a big database of people. When I once did usability testing at a company I was at, I actually went to the JAWS mailing list and, excuse me, I talked to the mailing list owner and asked if it would be okay if I put a post in. If you're in Chicago, we're looking for people to come to our location and use our software and tell us how well it works. When I did that, I didn't talk about anything about we want people with visual impairments. I just said we want people who use JAWS. We want to know how well our software works. So there's a way to put that so that they don't feel like they're under pressure. Although that is something that does happen during usability testing. The participants generally tend to feel like they're being tested. So any good usability researcher can get around that. So that's something you might try if you're interested in people who use JAWS, or people who use a screen reader, or people who use, who don't use a mouse. You could try to find organizations and find out if it would be okay to connect with the people through that. Usability testing participants do usually get paid anywhere from about $70 to about $150. So this will cost you if you're going to have them sit there for an hour and go through an application. You can do cheap usability testing if you can find people. Perhaps there is a community center that has an organization that meets there. You could go there with $50 worth of Starbucks cards and ask to talk to people for 5 minutes and give them a $5 Starbucks card or a $5 McDonald's card or whatever they prefer. So those are options.
Yeah, and it's funny. It's not funny, but let's say, for instance, during my commute, I'll be waiting at the train station, and I'll see an individual who with a cane who has vision issues. I will have the thought cross my mind that, gee, I should ask them if they'd be willing to do testing. And I believe the thing that prevents me from considering it further is that, like almost any stranger, they may react to you in a way that you do not expect, and sometimes it can be negatively. So I would definitely say it's best to work with an organization who has a list or a group of people who either have done testing before or who are willing to do this type of testing. Not everyone is up for that. Not everyone is willing to. But they do keep a list of people who, with various disabilities, who are willing to perform that kind of testing.
Mm-hmm. Some of the organizations, I think in Chicago, I think it's Open Doors,
Yes.
is the one I'm familiar with. I think I once tried to contact people through the Easter Seals organization. And then, just there is an organization right in my neighborhood, just across the street from me, who I think they're the Progress Center for Independent Living.
Oh, okay.
So, there are places that you could just go in and talk to whoever's in charge, ask them if this would be okay, especially if you're explaining to them that, we just want this person's feedback and we're willing to pay them for it.
Right, exactly. And they should be compensated because the information, the value of the information they're providing is, dare I say, it's priceless.
Yes.
So, we are almost out of time. I am looking to see if there are any other questions from the Twitterlands, from the Meetup website. I will hold on here for just a few more minutes before we wrap up. Before we do wrap up, but Andrew, did you have anything else you wanted to mention or discuss?
No, I think that what Elizabeth was saying about usability testing is actually really great. And of course, if you have the budget, there's some fantastic organizations out there that can provide some larger scale accessibility testing, SSB BART, Paciello Group. But for those people that are trying to just test out this technology, I think a fair thing to remember is that sometimes you'll be able to find people through just pushing through social media. Comcast, one of the draws was obviously the fact it's like, hey, it's a big company, but we had a database of people that were willing to do usability testing for us, simply because it's important for some people that this testing occurs. So it's important things to keep in mind that part of what you're doing by actively pursuing accessibility testing for your product is actually answering the prayers of a large, about 20% of the population, who largely are not being considered in a normal development cycle. So don't discredit that.
Exactly. Well, I tell you what, Our time is up. I want to thank Andrew and Elizabeth, our two experts, for attending today and discussing some of the questions that have come in. But additionally, I want to thank everyone who was on the Hangout today through, whether it be through Google Plus or Google Pages, through YouTube. This video will be on our YouTube site with captions within the next couple weeks over the holidays. If you have not already, please follow us on Twitter. Our username is A11YCHI. And definitely consider, in the Chicagoland area, consider joining the Chicago Digital Accessibility and Inclusive Design Meetup. We have some exciting events planned for 2016. My name is Dennis Deacon, and thank you for attending. Happy holidays.
Thank you, everybody.